Oh, hello. Welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, my name is Tiffany. In this video, we're going to be joining together all of our squares that we just added borders around. If you're just seeing this project for the very first time and would like to make this beautiful blanket I have right behind me, just go to my YouTube channel, click on playlists, find the 2024 sampler blanket playlist, and all the videos you need will be located right there. So go ahead and grab all 12 of your sections and let's check out the materials we're gonna need. All right, for the materials, we are staying consistent with our yarn through the entire project using the exact same yarn label, brand, all the things. So I'm staying consistent with Cascade Yarns 220 Superwash Merino wool. The color I'm using for the join is number 2 or Tuffet, which reminds me of Miss Muffet, but that's a completely unrelated topic. So go ahead and just make sure you're staying consistent throughout the whole project. You're also going to stay consistent with your crochet hook. Me, I'm using the G6 or 4.25 millimeter crochet hook. I do recommend with this method that we're going to be using that you have something on hand to keep the squares from shifting, whether that's a whole bunch of stitch markers or actually using something like a clasp, something to make sure that these squares do not move. You can even use your blocking board if you need to, where you just have the blocks locked into place as you're doing the join, which would work fantastic. And then of course the other things like your scissors and your yarn needle. Okay, grab your materials and let's start joining. First things first, arrange your squares however you want them to look. How do you want your finished blanket to be represented? Consider which colors that you think look better together, or if you want to switch some squares around to balance lighter colors and darker colors, or maybe you want to balance stitches and you don't want the two shell squares right next to each other. Once you have all of your squares placed, take out your stitch markers or your blocking boards and secure your squares together corner to corner, and then make one marker or one join in the middle of the sides, just so that these squares don't shift on you. Once all your squares are prepped, we are ready to start joining. Start by slip stitching into the corner of one of the squares. You'll want to place your crochet hook in that second or middle single crochet of the corner. Then chain 3 and slip stitch into the corner of the next square. Now these two squares are secure, they're joined together. To make the zigzag join, we're going to chain 3, make a diagonal line, and this is all eyeballing it, okay? You're going to make a diagonal line and then slip stitch into the stitch on square number 1 that you line up with. Then chain 3 and make a diagonal line and slip stitch into square number 2 into the stitch that you line up with. And then repeat this all the way up to join the two squares together. It is very important to note that it does not matter how many stitches that we skip or that we are skipping the same number of stitches every time. We are only concerned that the two corners of the squares stay aligned and that our chains for our join are all diagonal. If you can focus on that, then this joining method will be super easy and it'll work up very quickly. All of the squares that we are playing with, that we are joining together, all have a different number of stitches along each side, and some of them don't even have the same number of stitches on each side. So don't worry about making everything even. Just focus on looking at the squares and making sure that visually they're staying aligned. That's all that matters. Once you finish joining 2 squares together, bring down the next 2 squares of the blanket sequence. It's very important that when you finish joining 2 squares together, that you end the join in the corner of one of those squares. It doesn't matter which square, you just need to hit in the corner. So if you need to adjust the diagonal angles of your joins in order to make this happen, do it. Once you're in that corner stitch and you're ready to bring down 2 more squares, just chain 3, work diagonally, and slip stitch into the corner stitch of the diagonal square. Now we're going to treat this like we are starting from the very beginning. Chain 3 and slip stitch into the second new square that you just brought down. So there should be a horizontal line right there. And continue joining the next 2 squares just like we did the first 2 squares. Don't worry that one of the corners here was left blank and untouched. We're going to come back to that when we do the horizontal join. Remember that every square is going to have a different number of stitches along the edges. So do not take into consideration which stitch you are slip stitching into and that there's an even number of stitches between each slip stitch. If you do, it might mess you up. Just focus on making sure that the square edges stay the same, the square doesn't shift, and that you're making a full join. Once you reach the end of your vertical join and you're ready to stop and start working a whole nother section, make sure that you end in the corner of one of those squares and then chain 3 and slip stitch into the corner of the other square so that way you have a very flat join there to end that side of the work. Cut your yarn and tie off your project. To join horizontally, we're going to begin the same exact way that we did when we went to join vertically. You're going to slip stitch into the corner of one of the squares, then chain 3 and slip stitch into the corner of the next square. Now both those squares are joined together and we can start the zigzag. Chain 3, make a diagonal line, slip stitch into square number 1 where the diagonal line matches up, and repeat. When you get to the cross section where there are 4 squares and there's already a join happening, you're going to want to make sure that you stop the join of the 2 squares you're currently working in one of the corners. But not just any corner, you're also going to want to make sure that the corner that you stop in, after you chain 3, you will crisscross over the already existing chain 3 join there. We do not want you to stop in a corner and then chain 3 and be aligned or in line with the already existing chain 3 that's there. If you need to back up your stitches and re-angle some of those diagonal lines that you had, do so, because it's important that when you get to the edge of these first 2 squares that you end at the corner that will be crisscrossing over the pre-existing chain 3. After you reach that corner, chain 3, cross over that pre-existing chain 3 for a crisscross that looks really good. Chain 3, slip stitch into the corner of the adjacent or the square right next to this square, like we were starting a fresh brand new 2 squares. And continue the join where you chain 3, diagonal line, slip stitch, chain 3, diagonal line, slip stitch, all the way up. Once you have finished joining this side of the blanket and you're ready to tie off, ready at the edge, then make sure that you slip stitch into the corner stitch of one square, chain 3, slip stitch into the corner stitch of the next square for a very flat tie off, then cut your yarn, tie off your project. In these pictures, I want you to notice that some of these joins have a different number of stitches between each slip stitch. This is just something that we had to do in order to make all of these vastly different stitches join together. Also notice that some of the joins are thinner and some of the joins are wider. That's totally fine. No one will notice, and we hope they don't notice. We hope they pay attention to the squares themselves and not the join. Whew, joining complete. The only thing we have left to do is weave in our ends before we move on to the next step. I loved this joining method though, because one, I thought it was really pretty. Two, I loved the fact that I didn't have to worry about each square having the exact same number of stitches and a 1-to-1 stitch ratio. I could marry all of these vastly different stitches together and it worked. And so I was very excited about that. In the next video coming up, we're going to be adding a border around the entire project and wrapping up this blanket. Oh my gosh, it's gonna be amazing. If you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please push the button and select all notifications. That way, as soon as that video goes live, you get notified. Guys, thank you so much for working on this blanket with me. I'm so proud of you for making it this far. All right, so take care, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, guys.